Every new Street Fighter chapter brings with it new characters, but not all newcomers are successful. We're looking at Street Fighter 2, 3, Alpha, 4, and 5, and trying to pick out the single worst newcomer from each one on this week's episode of Talkin' Block. What do you want to talk about today? Street Fighter? I bet you want to talk about Street Fighter.
I always want to talk about Street Fighter, John. This is what we are known for.
All right, but before we talk about Street Fighter, if everyone, please, we need more subscribers. I don't know if you guys knew that, but we could definitely use more subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed, which is an alarming amount of you, please subscribe to our channel. And if you like this, give it a like. Throw a comment for the algorithm gods. We would really appreciate it if you like what we're doing here and you want us to do more. The way that happens is subscriptions and likes and stuff and engagement. So thank you guys so much for that.
John, we have a new intro. Are we going to talk about that?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm dropping the coin in.
We have a fancy. Well, here's the thing about that intro. How many people realized that the EventHubs logo was a token? Because I didn't until like a couple of months ago when we started putting this intro together and talking about what it would be. And you let me onto that. And I was like, that's a total mind blow. Guys, the EventHubs logo is a token. How cool is that?
Yep. Old school arcade callback here. So, both you and I are about 25 years old is what we're going with.
Yes.
So, we actually didn't play that much in arcades because, we were not from that era. Even though I've mentioned many times I'm from the, been around for 30 years in the FGC and I'm 25. I don't know how that works. Oh, yeah, actually, I know exactly how that works. I found the Fountain of Youth.
Well,
it's called
and also
lying.
I was gonna say that you just go by Street Fighter timeline rules, which just because when you started wasn't necessarily the earliest in the chronologically speaking, and so just don't think about it. Electric eels, it's all fine. Some days you'll have gray hair, and some days you'll be young, and then sometimes speaking of Street Fighter, I want to talk about the worst characters, the worst new characters or introduced characters in every numbered Street Fighter entry. Now, that's to be specific. I'm skipping Street Fighter 1 because that's as much as it's a Street Fighter game, but it's not a Street Fighter game like the rest of them. It's not really a two-player thing. Everything was new, and there was, for all intents and purposes, one playable character, whatever. When we talk about Street Fighter, we're talking about the Street Fighter 2 and beyond experience. So we're talking SF2, and that's all of Street Fighter 2, right up to Super Turbo, and then Street Fighter Alpha, so the Alpha series, not including the portables because that's just they got a bunch of extra characters and such, but we're just talking about Street Fighter Alpha 1 through 3. Then we're talking about Street Fighter 3, through Third Strike, Street Fighter 4 through Ultra, and then of course Street Fighter 5 through where we are right now with all 45 characters, including Luke. And it's not necessarily who's the worst in terms of tier list. It's like who, as a character, ultimately contributed the least, gave the least reason for people to pick up this game and purchase it, echoed in the rest of the franchise as something that makes Street Fighter better. And it's not to say that these characters didn't do that, but they did it less than everybody else that was introduced in their game. These are my opinions. They're correct, but you're free to disagree with them if you'd like. So before we get started here, if you would drop into a comment down below the characters in each Street Fighter game that you think were the worst, and then we can compare and contrast once we get all our answers out there. And before I reveal my Street Fighter 2 pick, I'm going to put John here on the spot and ask him, of the Street Fighter 2 cast, and all of these characters have been brought back in later games, showing that's at least one evidence that they are important. Capcom sees them as fruitful to an extent. This is probably the hardest one to pick because every character here is reasonably successful. But if you were to pick one Street Fighter 2 character that just was the worst, who would you pick?
Cammy. No, I'm kidding. It would be probably, of all of them, it would probably be T-Hawk, with second place being DJ.
Ooh, interessante. I picked DJ, and T-Hawk was in the worth talking about kind of category that I came up with. And I wouldn't argue too much to say that T-Hawk would be here. I ultimately landed on DJ because I feel like he's had the least amount of. I've seen a lot more talk about T-Hawk and, give him a gun, bring him back. I want to see him. And just for about every comment that you see about T-Hawk saying, bring him back, you see somebody else saying, not so much. But I do think there's a little bit more fervor and fan base for T-Hawk than I see for DJ. And so that's the one that I went with here. And so I did a little research on DJ to see why he doesn't seem to have resonated as much as some of the other characters here. Now, he did come back in Street Fighter 4, so there's that, and he was around in Street Fighter Alpha in the handheld portables. But like I said, we're not talking about that.
He was in Alpha 3 as well. He did come back to that one. So he on PlayStation. Yeah, it's there were console exclusive characters, and then there were arcade characters, and then so DJ was a console character for the PlayStation Alpha 3. So.
Okay, fair enough. Was that like along with like the dolls and like Eagle and such?
Eagle was, I think, in Alpha 3 Max, which is the portable version. That one had Ingrid as well. But you could also you could unlock the dolls, I think, and stuff. Like there was a lot of shenanigans there with the some of the console ports of stuff you could do. So.
But he was in like the tournament played version of the game where you would see him.
Well, the tournament played was arcade. You did not play on consoles back then. So
yeah, it's like kind of wishy-washy here, and I've only ever played Alpha on arcade, so I've never seen DJs available. I know I've seen him before, like in footage and whatnot, but so I'm sure he's kind of an alpha. But so I wanted to talk about his origins. He was one of the 4 new challengers came out. Now, ultimately, it was Fei Long, DJ, T-Hawk, and Cammy. But originally, it was planned that Yun and Yang would be instead of Fei Long and DJ. And but they were 2 similar characters, and they were both, they're both Hong Kong, and they both had similar fight styles. So sort of at the last minute, Capcom decided they didn't want to have so much Yun and Yang. So instead, they had Fei Long, which is also a Hong Kong character that sort of checked that box. And then they brought in James Goddard, who was a co-head on co-lead on Hyper Fighting, and they asked him, what does this need? And remember, this was back in the early 90s, and he said, we don't have much representation of good guy, badass, black characters. That was the initial motivation for DJ, and so Capcom Japan was like, all right, let's do it.
One of the origins also of DJ is Taibo, Billy Blanks. He used to do, he was a huge influence, and you can see that the similarities here between the two are pretty noticeable when you put them side by side.
Well, now I have to put in footage of Billy Blanks.
Well, now our channel just got way better because we have footage of Billy Blanks on it.
I suppose you're not wrong. My mom did a lot of Taibo back in the day. That was my introduction to Billy Blanks. But before that, he was a movie star, and he actually played a villainous character, but they were still like, let's model him after, make him a good guy who's just about good vibes, making music and such. He's Jamaican, he's laid back and such. And so that worked to a degree, but it seems like the character... he checked that diversity box for sure, and he was fun and such. But as far as story goes, he never had much contribution to the overall Street Fighter story, and that remained the case even when they brought him back in Street Fighter 4. In fact, I think if you read through the Wikipedia, it even notes, it's like, he doesn't have much impact on the story. He's around for a reason, but it's really not to drive the story and such. It's just like he's chill and he listens to music and fine, fair enough. But I think that's where other characters kind of resonated more, where DJ didn't have that contribution to the story. And when your competition for relevant characters, or what we're talking about here, is the rest of the cast of Street Fighter 2, you gotta be in top form. And so there is
his Super Street Fighter 2 ending. He finds a new, he calls it, like a 2-in-1. That used to be the phrasing that we'd use for a cancel. Like you get 2 moves in one, basically, like you're canceling into it. DJ found a new 2-in-1 beat. That's his ending, and so he's like, oh, this is going to make me millions of dollars because I'm, got a new 2-in-1 beat and everyone's going to love it and blah, blah, blah. That's his whole canonical ending in that game. And it's like, okay, I mean, you found a really good musical tune, but that's okay. So,
right. So he had a reasonably memorable play style. That's good, because part of this is, do people enjoy playing the character? Are they going to land with the population? And surely DJ did. But when you kind of look at it, his contributions to the story, some other characters don't have amazing contributions, but they're memorable. Like Blanca. We talk about Blanca's all the time because of how wonky it is, and Blanca's sort of it's hard to say that Blanca's an awesome, amazing character in some respects, but man, he's been back so many times. He gets talked about about. He's got a fan base. You can't argue with it, you know. But DJ, yeah, he's got a fan base, but he's only been back a few times, and I think where he falls short is the substance in who he is as a character and his contributions to the story, which he's still good enough to be brought back and have that fleshed out. So I think you could bring DJ back, and like I said, he was probably the hardest one to choose on this list for me.
Yeah, I do overall like DJ. I do like what he represents, but they've never been able to do much with him to make him notable outside of his gameplay, which I actually think is pretty cool. He's always been an interesting character. He's got good gameplay approaches, but man, in Street Fighter 4, he just ended up being a balls character way too often. Where Capcom thought they were doing something with him, and then they like nerf him almost in every version of the game. And I was like, you do realize DJ's low tier, right? And they're like, yeah, that's why we nerfed him.
Yeah, that didn't help him out.
Yeah,
it didn't help him out in Street Fighter 4 being regarded as one of the worst. And I think he climbed the ladder in the tier list a little bit after Street Fighter 4, or after, I should say after 5 came out. Yeah. But you know, how much is that going to do for you? So, DJ, do you agree? Let us know. And we're jumping on over to Street Fighter Alpha, and I got Sodom in Street Fighter Alpha. Sodom, okay, so I had seen this character a handful of times. There were many times where there were supposed leaks or speculation that he would actually be joining Street Fighter 5, and indeed he's in the background of one of the ring of, the Mad Gear Hideout ring stage. Sodom's been around in the Street Fighter and Capcom's Final Fight universe for a long time. He's actually a Final Fight boss, so he's part of the Mad Gear gang and part of this underground fighting ring. Here's the thing, though. When you look into him, he's not a very cool character. He's actually Captain Cultural Appropriation in that he's an American who really, really loves Japanese culture, which, fair enough, you can do that. But he's also really bad at what he does. Sodom is a joke character, not too far removed from Dan. And first of all, I never realized that. And although I haven't done an in-depth kind of dive on this character until recently, I've been around in the Street Fighter community long enough to, like, if that were something, that really resonated, I would know that kind of a thing.
Speaking about Sodom being a joke character, like he actually grabs you in Alpha and then rubs you on the ground, like basically rubs you on the carpet, and you burst into flames. You burst into flames. It's ridiculous. It's you get the impression that Sodom's fairly jokey, but then by the time like Alpha 3 rolls around, I think it's his exism, he pulls out a freaking sword. He's fighting like with it. I always heard it wasn't a katana blade, it was like something else, but basically he's fighting with a freaking huge katana blade, and he's gonna slice you with it. It's like, how's that fair? But you know,
that's part of his story, is that part of what made him a high profile figure in the underground fighting was because he brought weapons, and where a lot of other people didn't bring weapons. So it's like, that's a crappy character trait that he has to kind of get this unfair advantage over others, and he's not a particularly good at using these Japanese weapons. And yeah, I remember playing through Final Fight when I was a kid and getting stuck on him because, you know, it's in the arcade rules, you only have a certain amount of continues, and he was hard, and you have to figure out, you know, angles and whatnot. He was a big pain in my butt, and his name in the SNES version that I was playing was Katana, so I always figured those were katanas, but whatever, guys. They're Japanese. Maybe he mistook them, because that's part of who he is too. His kanji on the front of which I think is just he's wearing jeans and like hockey pads and like a jersey sort of a thing that he put together himself. The kanji is supposed to be shi, which means death, but he writes it wrong, and so it doesn't actually mean anything. And then I think they changed that in Street Fighter 5. There's some, he's in the background and such, and then he's got like a card for virtually every character who's got one of those in SF5. And I think they fixed it. But originally, he's passionate about something, but he can't get it right, and that's like, it's not attractive. And he's not a particularly strong character, as far as I understand. I'm gonna ask you, where was he on the Street Fighter Alpha tier lists?
He was pretty much like unplayable. I think that I think people played Dan a little bit more often than they played Sodom, and that gives you a pretty good idea of like how bad he was. Yeah,
some of the other bullet points here really quick. Like he's got this higher status because he wins because he uses weapons, but then he encounters a character like Guy who's legit and gets his butt kicked and goes, oh yeah, he gets exposed really easily. One of his win quotes, he says, "Die, job, death, car," which the reason he says that is because in Japanese he's trying to say, "Are you all right?" but he used Google Google Translate in its early phases, or maybe even still now. And so the whole idea is he's just not good at what he does. And as we'll see in the future of this episode, Capcom does this, but it's like when that happens, it's funny to like they dialed it in correctly when they did it with with Dan. But man, these other characters that they've done that with just have not worked. And so Sodom, not a good character, not a character that you can really identify with and get behind unless you're kind of like a loser that tries to hide it. And it's like, no one likes those people. The kind of character is not going to get invited to birthdays. Just he's definitely the worst. And after this research, I'm less about seeing him in a future game than I was before.
Yeah, I actually enjoy how goofy Sodom is, but he has to be done in like the right fashion to make him work. And there's only so much room for joke characters, and usually that spot goes to Dan and Blanca, and a few others like that. But
yeah, I wouldn't mind them replacing them and doing a good job on Sodom. Like that could be good, but as it stands now, he's easily the weakest of Alpha. Okay, Street Fighter 3. We talked about this, and John and I should say, talked about this a little bit before recording, and I originally had one character. John sort of convinced me into another character, and now I have no idea. Okay, so my answer right now is 12 for Street Fighter 3. He's sort of a blank slate that never got much written on it. And he's got some cool moves, but a lot of them sort of echo what other characters already do, and cool moves in and of themselves. Yeah.
Well, because he has the X copy move, and he literally will morph into other characters and stuff.
Well, as I understand it, that's the only time he can be very good or effective is if he morphs into a good character, because he himself is not that great.
Yeah, he's a pretty terrible character. I think he's... some people argue if he's worse than Sean or not in that game, and Sean is almost the undisputed worst character. But usually 12 falls in maybe right above him slightly. The big thing about 12 is he has interesting moves, but they do almost no damage. So you have to sit there and, Chun-Li does her crouching medium kick into super and lops off 60% of your life and leads into a mix-up, where 12 has to like hit the button like 20 different ways and grow another hand, and then he takes off like... Yeah, it takes off like 5% of your life then, and it's like, okay. So you got to work really, really, really hard to make 12 viable.
Right, and so he's supposed to be this sort of government experiment that has these, similar to the T-1000 at the time, right? Creating like blades out of his hand and such, which back when Terminator 2 was the fresh new thing. So he had some cool potential there. And one of the things that they say in their description about him is that he's particularly resistant because they describe like his skin or whatever it is made up of some futuristic style mega chemical whatever, but it's not reflected in the gameplay because he has the fourth lowest health in the entire game. So like none of the cool things about him actually manifest when you're playing him, except for maybe some cool animations, but otherwise he's very like robotic alien that speaks most of the time in binary, and a lot of the stuff that's interesting about him is fairly surface level. You can't really relate to him and such. He's just this, like I say, a blank slate that never gets much written on it. So maybe 12, but my original answer was Remy, and Remy certainly has more personality, but I dare say his personality is a huge turnoff. He's nihilistic. He's just this like hot topic emo character that hates fighting, hates the idea of fighting, hates fighters, hates everyone, and is just this huge turnoff of a character that is kind of like the antithesis of Street Fighter. You got all these characters that are celebrating fighting from different, corners of the globe, and what might it look like if they all come together, and then you have Remy, who's the antithesis to that, which that's what they were going for, sure, but also like that's not what we're doing here. That's like bringing a meat eater to a vegans conference or something like that and saying he's like, or she's like part of the group, and it's just like Remy did not fit. His moveset was fine, but it was essentially Guile's or Nash's, and we already had Guile's or Nash's. He's like the one character that hasn't come back almost at all. He's not even in the Udon comics, where I think every other character, like Lee that we talked about last week, the Drunken Master, he's at least in a few Udon comics where he's like a relevant character. Remy appears in an alternate cover for one issue, as far as and never again in other games. I think he might get referenced a little bit, but he might be the least called back to character of all of them. Don't quote me, but he's definitely low there. But you don't think Remy over 12? Why?
The one thing about Remy that he had going for it is he had really interesting gameplay. It's 12 didn't even have like he doesn't have anything interesting pretty much at all. So Remy actually had gameplay going for him. You wanted kind of Guile's moveset in that game and have it be something. So he had the low and high, sonic booms basically, and he could throw like 500 million of them on screen at one time. There was some interesting stuff there, but yeah, from a plot standpoint, I agree that he's kind of a turnoff of a character unless that kind of thing appeals to you. So.
Yeah, and if you were to bring him back in modern times, I don't see how to do that without Taylor or tweaking him to be like nihilistic for modern times, and what would that mean? So in the late 90s, it was kind of like Hot Topic, nothing's cool, whatever, and maybe you could continue to do that, but I think you'd have to evolve that, and man, that gets into some dicey territory, and those kind of personalities turn a lot of people off, so I'm hung up on it. So I have 12 here, but it could just as easily be Remy. I'm sorry, I'm not as decisive, but it's his fault. I don't take any responsibility, much like I think Remy wouldn't. But if you guys could help us out in the comments and let us know specifically between 12 or Remy, or if you think it's somebody else in Third Strike, let us know who you think the worst character is there. Ready to move on to Street Fighter 4?
Let's do it.
Can you guess who I'm picking from Street Fighter 4?
There's a good amount of choices. No, I don't want to guess on this one because, yeah.
Yeah, there's DeCapri, there's Rufus, there's Hakan. You could argue Oni. People don't really like Abel. But of course, if you've been watching this for this Talk and Block show that we've been doing for any amount of time, you probably know it's El Fuerte. El Fuerte is similar to what we talked about earlier with Sodom. He's very passionate about cooking. All right, fair enough. From Mexico, hey, as a native Arizonan and Tucsonan, I can say Mexican food is my absolute favorite, and there is a lot of depth you can go in there with how much of a contribution that is to the rest of the world. So they base him as this lucha libre chef. Makes sense for Street Fighter, but when you get down to it, he's really bad at what he does. He's super passionate about food, and yet one of his storylines is that he tries to make this dish where he marries a couple of different cuisines from around the world. I think it's like with E Honda, influence from E Honda and maybe Zangief, and he tries to make it like Mexicanize it, and it just looks absolutely terrible. And then he drops some chocolate into it to add some sweetness, and you're like, you have no idea what you're doing. You're going off of passion, which is somewhat commendable, but you're not coming up with anything worth anything to anybody. It's this gross fish stew with chocolate in it, and we haven't even started to talk about his gameplay, which was incredibly annoying, not very Street Fighter, not very fun to play against, sometimes entertaining to see Pepe like ruin people's lives and make them question everything that they were doing up until this point, but really that doesn't make the character good. It makes him entertaining in a fleeting way, and ultimately I think in the long term not a very good look for Street Fighter 4 at all.
I have to chime in on the Peppadai stuff because there were some places that Peppadai went to and pulled that crap, and the crowd was not
did he get
pleased.
Where?
He got booed, and he almost a few times worse got happened to him for some of the places he traveled in. Some of his companions were not too happy about that and stuff. But I love Peppadai. Like I actually enjoyed Fuerte's gameplay until they made him really good. Like when that latter version of the game, when the quesadilla bomb got a lot better. Just because Fuerte's damage was lower, but also he's probably my pick on here for a variety of other reasons. I actually enjoyed his gameplay, relatively speaking, kind of thing. When he was bad, it kind of made sense. It was like, okay, yeah, he's kind of a joke character, but yeah. So.
I have a line here, and you tell me if you agree with me or not. If Capcom revealed Fuerte, especially on a starting lineup for Street Fighter 6, people would be booing.
I certainly would be, and I think a lot of other people would be too. It's a really bad idea. A really bad idea.
Yeah, it is not super dynamic cooking time here. All right, Street Fighter 5. This was also a particularly difficult one, and this, I have some wiggle room here. I could be convinced otherwise. So we did a segment a few weeks, maybe a few months ago, talking about the newcomers of Street Fighter 5 specifically, and the one that I ranked the lowest was Falk. I believed that then, but things have changed. I'm not so sure that's the case anymore. And so I don't have Falk as my character here. Now, people have been really pissed off about characters like Rashid because of how powerful he's been, but he's also got a lot of playtime. I didn't put it as Rashid. Ed, similar to Falk, but I think he gets enough acknowledgement and such. He's definitely not my favorite, but maybe not the worst of the bunch. And I gotta say, Luke is on this list too, because I mean he's really turning some people off right now. But like the story of Luke hasn't been fully told yet, so I'm not gonna take this wild stab at and say maybe it's Luke. It comes down to two characters, Nikali and Fong. And Nikali was easily the answer before the most recent update. And I'm playing Nikali once again. I was a Nikali main, and now I'm a Nikali main again. And what Capcom has given him has really made him a character again. And that might be all he needs. It might be too little too late, but I think he's super interesting. I think he had a ton of potential, and it was squandered and wasted up until this point. But maybe he gets it back here because he's a cool character. He's still a cool character. So that leaves Fong. And I think that Fong never really worked. He's never been a very strong character. I know he just won CEO. Thanks a lot, Mono, for making this slightly harder for me. I mean, I guess good job. But he's never been a character that's been fun to play against. People are frustrated, but often not motivated enough to take Fong into the training room and learn against them. It's more of like, when I come across the occasional Fong player, it sucks, and I'm going to be in weird block stuns that I don't understand. And that's obviously on the individual, but the fact that so many people are not very motivated to learn how to fight this character, not very motivated to play this character, and ultimately I don't think we'll see him come back. He also gets a free pass to be a king of Shadaloo out of nowhere. He's all of a sudden at the same status as Balrog, Sagat, Vega. It's like, nah. And then also you brought up something interesting about the fact that Shadaloo is going away. Did you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, Shadaloo's basically toast, and so Fong's like one chance to shine was Street Fighter V, and I don't think he ever hit much of a stride there. And I think if he goes away and kind of goes away for good, I don't think too many people are going to shed many tears.
Yeah.
He would be my pick as well. I think the other characters just have more potential, more opportunities than him to succeed, and I think he's a dud pretty much from like every aspect, but very heavily from his plot, his implementation, how Capcom did him. He just sucks.
I like the idea. I like the idea of the poison, but ultimately that mechanic never really resonated with the rest of the game. Like it never found its good spot where it's like, all right, that's formidable, but also I can deal with it. It was mostly moot. And even though it certainly had an effect, it wasn't one that was conspicuous and exciting and energizing. It was just like, oh yeah, and poison's sort of there too. So, and Fong's sort of there too, was what he kind of amounted to.